Welcome back to The Explainer. For our Week 1, Day 2 agenda, we are fully shifting our focus to modern psychology. We're going to be diving into the foundational nature-nurture debate, exploring exactly how our biology and our environment interact through the biopsychosocial approach, and breaking down the major contemporary perspectives and subfields that make up this incredibly fascinating science.
Right off the bat, we have to ask the ultimate, really unanswerable question drawn straight from the writings of clinical psychologist Eric Turkheimer. Are we products of our environments or our genes? Is nature the governing force behind our behavior, or is it nurture? You know, this is absolutely one of the most fiercely contested areas of science. Do we coast from success to success, or maybe struggle with mental illness purely based on our hardwired biology? Or are we shaped entirely by our parents, our culture, and our presumably free will?
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, nature versus nurture. Second, the gene-environment dance. Third, 7 perspectives of psychology. Fourth, psychology's diverse subfields. And fifth, basic versus applied research.
Starting us off with Section 1, Nature versus Nurture.
This age-old tug-of-war has literally defined human behavioral studies for decades. It's a debate deeply rooted in philosophical arguments about whether humans are just blank slates shaped by experience or if we have this inescapable biological destiny. Think about the contrast here. On one hand, you have our underlying biology, our genetic code, and the brain structures that dictate behavior. On the other hand, you have the environment, represented by growth, our upbringing, and the physical world around us. But here's the thing, modern psychology doesn't actually choose a side. The scientific consensus? It's a highly complex mixture of both. To really wrap your head around this, imagine your mind is a garden. The seeds planted in the soil represent your genetic code. That seed is the literal blueprint for the color of your petals, the height of your stem, and your natural resilience to the elements. But the soil quality, the amount of sunlight, the gardener who tends to you, well, that represents your environment. And it makes perfect sense, right? A prize-winning seed is still going to wither in toxic soil. Conversely, a super fragile seed can actually bloom beautifully with the exact right care. Who we become is entirely dependent on how our nature interacts with our nurture.
Moving into Section 2, the gene-environment dance.
Researcher Kenneth Dodge describes this biological and environmental interaction as a dynamic developmental dance. They aren't static, they aren't separate, they operate in tandem. As Eric Turkheimer puts it, the two most basic hypotheses, nature and nurture, are irredeemably confounded. This is a crucial point to understand. Why are they confounded? Well, because in human families, the exact same parents who pass their genes down to their kids are almost always the ones providing the family environment too. Because of that, you simply can't separate the two. I mean, you can't ethically run experiments where you separate human children into deprived versus enriched conditions just to see what happens to their genetic potential.
So what we're really looking at is a two-way street. Discoveries over the past decade have proven that the environment actually alters gene expression, while our genes impose limits on environmental effects. We are born with what researchers call biological affordances. Let me give you an example. A young child with an aggressive disposition is going to incite a very different environmental reaction from society than a calm child. In a healthy, supportive environment, society might actually compensate for that vulnerability with extra care. But in a poor environment, that same disposition might provoke rejection or abuse, which just exacerbates the child's behavioral difficulties. The environment reacts to us, which in turn potentiates our behavioral outcomes. It's a continuous loop.
Let's look at Section 3, 7 perspectives of psychology.
So, now that we understand the sheer complexity of this biopsychosocial web, how do scientists actually go about studying it? To picture this, imagine 7 blindfolded scholars standing around an elephant in the pitch dark. One feels the trunk and says, "Oh, it's a snake." Another grabs a leg and says, "No way, it's a tree." A third touches the side and claims it's a wall. Modern psychology approaches the human mind in the exact same way. No single viewpoint holds the complete 100% truth about human behavior, but none of them are wrong either. They just represent different pieces of a massive puzzle.
At the center of psychology, we have this central hub branching out into a really eclectic web of perspectives. You've got the biological perspective, looking at brain wiring, the cognitive lens, examining internal thought patterns, and the behavioral viewpoint, watching learned, observable actions. We also have evolutionary, humanistic, psychodynamic, and sociocultural perspectives. The absolute best way to look at this framework is with a yes-and rhythm. Yes, our brain chemistry matters, and our cultural heritage matters, and our learned behaviors matter. Today, most modern psychologists use an eclectic model, pulling from all these different lenses to build a comprehensive understanding of human behavior.
Now for Section 4, Psychology's diverse subfield.
All right, so we've got the academic theory down, but what does this actually look like in practice? Psychology isn't just one single career path. It is an expansive continent. When you look at the specializations people study, clinical psychology takes up a huge footprint, sure. But you also have counseling, school psychology, developmental, educational, and cognitive fields. Each slice of this discipline represents dedicated professionals using psychological science to illuminate our understanding and, honestly, to improve the world around us in highly specific ways.
And wrapping up with Section 5, Basic versus Applied Research.
To make sense of this huge landscape, we generally divide it up into two main territories. On one side, we have basic research. Think of these folks as the explorers. Experimental, developmental, and cognitive psychologists fall right here. Their goal? To study the basic psychological processes, things like learning, memory, and perception, purely to gather data and expand human knowledge. Now, on the other side, we have applied research. Think of them as the engineers. Industrial and organizational psychologists, forensic psychologists, sports psychologists, they live here. They take all that amazing data gathered by the explorers and actually apply it to solve real-world problems. We're talking about things like designing safer airplane cockpits, assessing mental competency for a court trial, or helping pro athletes overcome performance anxiety.
Sitting right in the middle of this landscape, kind of bridging the gap between knowledge and application, are the clinical professionals focused on healing. Clinical psychologists integrate the heavy science of psychology directly with the treatment of very complex human problems. They are the ones working face-to-face with individuals to heal behavioral wounds, treat psychological disorders, and basically help people navigate some of life's toughest crises.
Now, I definitely want to clear up a very common point of confusion for anyone studying psychology, and that is the difference between a psychologist and a psychiatrist. Clinical psychologists focus on diagnosing and treating problematic patterns of behavior through clinical therapy and counseling. Psychiatrists, on the other hand, approach the mind from a strictly medical standpoint. They are actual medical doctors who balance brain chemistry, often by prescribing medication alongside clinical treatment. They both want to heal you, but they use very different primary tools based on their specific training.
Wow, we've covered some incredible ground today. From the seed and soil of nature and nurture, to our 7 blindfolded scholars, all the way to the explorers and engineers of modern psychological subfields. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. Which perspective or subfield would you use to study your own mind? If you had to map your own psyche today, would you look through a cognitive lens, a biological one, or maybe an evolutionary one? I challenge you to apply this new map of the mind to your own life and the choices you make every day. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious, keep exploring, and I'll see you next time.